Say it to my face, the thing you could only write in a letter. Jacob's voice broke on it. Emily stood frozen on the train steps 2,000 miles from everything she'd ever known and whispered, I love you. I've loved you since the letter about the chair that faces the mountains. Then his hat fell into the dust, and his arms opened no more words, just his whole trembling heart held open, and she ran into them, and 6 months of ink became one embrace that made her his forever. If you're watching, subscribe and stay with me to the very end, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled tonight. Jacob Hayes did not open the letter that night. He carried it out to the porch, held it up against the last light in the sky, and told himself he would burn it in the morning. He told himself a lot of things on that porch. He told himself he was fine. He told himself the silence didn't bother him. He told himself that a man who'd buried his mother, his father, and his younger brother, all before the age of 25, had used up whatever right he'd ever had to want more than a full belly and a quiet night. He didn't burn it. You're still holding it, his sister said from the doorway. I'm deciding. You've been deciding for an hour. Go home, Ruth. Ruth Hayes Calloway crossed her arms and leaned against the frame the way their mother used to, and Jacob hated how much she looked like her in the dark. I'll go home when you tell me you'll at least read it. One letter. She took the time to write it. The least you can do is take the time to read it. You had no right. I had every right. I'm your sister. I watched you turn into a fence post. Her voice cracked at the edges, and she covered it with sharpness the way she always did. Do you know what I see when I come out here, Jacob? I see a man who talks more to his horse than to another human being. I see you set one plate at supper, one cup, one chair pulled out. You've built yourself a coffin, and you're living in it, and I will not stand by and bury a fourth Hayes before his time. The words landed harder than she meant them to. He heard her breath catch after she said them. That's a cruel thing to say, Jacob said quietly. It's a true thing to say. Cruel and true aren't opposites. She pushed off the doorframe. Her name is Emily. Emily Whitmore. She's a schoolteacher. Out of 41 replies to that advertisement, hers is the only one I didn't throw in the fire because hers is the only one that sounded like a person and not a woman shopping for a roof. She turned to go, then stopped. Read it or don't. But if you don't you ever again tell me you had nobody. You'll have had somebody. You'll have thrown her in the fire yourself. The screen door slapped shut behind her. Jacob sat alone with the letter for a long time. Then he went inside, lit the lamp back up, sat down at the table where he ate his one meal from his one plate, and he opened it. Dear Mr. Hayes, I should confess at once that I do not entirely know why I am writing this. I read your notice 3 times. The first time I laughed at myself for reading it at all. The second time I read it because I was bored. The third time I read it because a single line in it would not leave me alone. You wrote that you were looking for someone who could be content with a quiet life and honest about not always being content, because pretending is a kind of loneliness worse than the real thing. I have been pretending for 26 years. I did not know a stranger in Montana would be the first person to say the true thing out loud. So, here I am, a stranger writing back. My name is Emily Whitmore. I teach reading to children who would rather be anywhere else, and I love them for it. I live in a large house in Philadelphia, where I am fed well-dressed well, and understood not at all. I am expected to marry a man named Charles Pemberton in the autumn. He owns a great deal of railroad. He has never once asked me a question about myself and been interested in the answer. You asked in your notice only one thing of whoever might reply, tell me one true thing. Here is my one true thing, Mr. Hayes. I am afraid that I am going to live my entire life and never once be known by anyone and be buried under a beautiful stone with the wrong name on it, a married name, a stranger's name, and that no one standing at the grave will have ever heard my actual voice. That is more than you asked for. Forgive me. It has been a long time since anyone invited the truth, and it seems I had a great deal of it saved up. Yours cautiously, Emily. Jacob read it once fast, the way you check a room for danger. Then he read it slow. Then he read the line about the beautiful stone with the wrong name on it, and he set the letter down, and he put his face in his hands, and for the first time in a long time, Jacob Hayes was not sure whether the thing tightening his chest was grief, or something that had been buried right next to it. He did not sleep. At dawn, he saddled his horse, rode into Cedar Hollow, and stood outside the post office for 10 full minutes before he could make himself walk in and buy paper. Dear Miss Whitmore, I am not a man of many words. My sister will tell you that. My sister will tell you a great many things, some of them true. You gave me a true thing, so I will give you one back, since that seems to be the arrangement. Here it is. 3 years ago, my younger brother Samuel died on this ranch. He was 19. A horse threw him, and I was not there. I was 2 ridges over pulling a calf out of the mud, and by the time I found him, the light was already going out of him. He looked up at me, and he said, "Jacob, tell Ruth," and then he never said the rest of it. I have spent 3 years trying to guess the end of that sentence. Tell Ruth what? I will not know until I die myself. I tell you this because you said you are afraid to live your whole life and never be known. I understand that fear. I live on the other side of it. I am afraid I knew someone completely and lost him before he could finish a sentence. And now every word anyone says to me, I listen too hard because I keep waiting for someone to finish it. You are the first person in 3 years I have wanted to write a sentence to. Finish it however you like. Yours, Jacob. He did not expect an answer. He expected honestly that a woman from a great house in Philadelphia would read a letter about a dead boy in the mud and quietly decide the man who wrote it was carrying too much and put down her pen. Her reply came in 11 days. The letters came every 11 days after that, then every 9, then every 7. And by the time the summer had turned, the grass gold, Jacob could feel the rhythm of the mail in his body like a second heartbeat. Ruth noticed. Ruth noticed everything. You shaved, she said one morning riding up as he mended fence. I shave. On a Tuesday. It's not a crime to shave on a Tuesday, Ruth. She sat her horse and watched him with an expression that was trying very hard not to be a smile and failing. The Wallace boy said you were at the post office again yesterday. The Wallace boy should mind the post and not the people. How many letters now? Jacob drove the staple in hard. I don't count them. He counted them. He counted them the way a man counts money he's afraid to spend. There were 19. He kept them in a wooden box that had been his mother's, the only thing on the whole ranch he ever locked. You don't count them, Ruth repeated, and now she was smiling openly. Jacob, look at me, you stubborn thing. She waited until he did. You're happy. He opened his mouth to deny it. He found he couldn't. That was the first thing that frightened him. Not the letters, but the fact that a woman he had never seen had reached across 2,000 miles and pried open a door he'd nailed shut with his own hands, and he had let her. He had helped her. And now if she stopped writing, he did not know what would be left of the man she'd found on the other side. You're not happy for me, he said finally. You're happy for yourself. You did this. I lit the match. You're the one who kept the fire going. Ruth turned her horse. Write her back today. Don't make her wait the 11 days. Life is short, little brother. Ask the boy in the mud. 2,000 miles east, Emily Whitmore was fighting a war on a battlefield with silk curtains. You have not answered a single one of my questions about the wedding, her father said across the length of the dinner table. Richard Whitmore did not raise his voice. He had never in his life needed to. His voice was already at the pitch that meant I have decided, and your feelings are a formality we are performing before the decision takes effect. Charles asked whether November suits you. I told him it suited us all. Charles asked you, Emily said. He didn't ask me. Charles is a practical man. Charles is a man who calls me my dear and cannot tell you the color of my eyes. Emily. Her mother's warning from the far end. Not at the table. When then, mother? You've given me no other room to say it in. Not the parlor, not the garden. I said it in the garden last Sunday, And father walked away in the middle of my sentence. Her voice was shaking now, and she pressed her hands flat to the tablecloth to steady them. I am 26 years old. I have read every book in this house twice. I speak French, and I teach children to read, and I have never once been permitted to decide a single thing about my own life, and now you would decide the rest of it in one word. November. Like a shipping date. Richard set down his fork with terrible precision. Where do you go on Thursdays? He said. Emily went cold. To the school. You know I go to... You come home late on Thursdays. The school closes at 3. You come home at 6. He watched her face the way he watched a business rival's face. And there is a great deal of correspondence coming to this house addressed to you in a hand I don't recognize. Western postmark. Course paper. He let the words sit. I am not a foolish man, Emily. I have simply been waiting to see whether you would lie to me about it. The whole table had gone silent. Emily looked at her father, and then at her mother, who was staring very hard at her plate, and Emily understood in that moment 2 things at once. She understood that she had been watched, and she understood, from the way her heart was slamming against her ribs at the mere mention of course paper and Western postmark, exactly how much she stood to lose. I won't lie to you, she said. Good. I am in love with him. The fork Richard had set down so precisely, he picked it back up and gripped it until his knuckles went white, and that was the only crack that ever showed in Richard Whitmore, the whole night the single fork. You've never met him, he said. No. You are in love, with ink on paper. I am in love with a man who finishes my sentences, Emily said and stood, because she could no longer bear to say it sitting down. Which is more than I can say for the man you've sold me to. She left the room before he could answer. She got up the stairs before her legs gave out, and she sat on the floor of her bedroom with her back against the door, and she pressed Jacob's last letter to her chest, and she thought, I have to leave. I have to leave before he finds the box. She did not yet know he already had. Jacob's letters, meanwhile, had turned into confessions, and he barely knew how it had happened. He wrote her about the sunsets. Not that they were beautiful, he never said beautiful, but that there was a particular hour after the work was done, when the loneliness got so loud he could hear his own blood, and how lately in that hour he found himself talking to her out loud on the porch as though she were sitting in the empty chair. He wrote her that he'd started pulling out 2 chairs. She wrote back, Which chair is mine? He wrote, The one that faces the mountains. You'd want to see them. She wrote, How do you know what I'd want to see? He wrote, Because you told me your window in Philadelphia faces a wall. And Emily, reading that in her room, with the door locked against her own father, wept. Because in 26 years, no one had ever remembered which way her window faced. They fell in love the way 2 people fall through ice, not all at once, but crack by crack each letter. Another crack until the whole surface gave, and there was nothing left to stand on but each other, and by then it was far, far too late to climb back out, and neither of them wanted to. 6 months. 6 months, and she knew the sound of his grief, and he knew the shape of her loneliness, and they had never once heard each other's voices. Then came the letter that changed everything, and it was not a love letter. Jacob. I have very little time to write this, and I must be plain. My father knows. He has known for some time. Yesterday he called me into his study, and there on his desk was my box, the box where I keep your letters, and he had read them, all of them. He read them the way he reads a contract, looking for the weakness in it. He told me he has spoken to Charles and moved the wedding to September. He told me that if I refuse, he will cut me off. Not only the money, I don't care about the money. He will make certain I never teach again in this city, or any other. He has that power. He named the schools he would ruin. He told me my infatuation with a Montana cattleman would pass like a fever. And then he said the thing that decided me, Jacob. He said, You will thank me in 10 years. Thank him. For a life with the wrong name on the stone. I am coming west. I have money of my own that he does not know about, small savings. Egg money, the pennies I've hidden for years without knowing why. Now I know why. I have bought a ticket. I leave Thursday. I will arrive in Cedar Hollow on the 14th on the afternoon train if the schedules I have are right. I have to tell you the truth because we promised each other the truth, and I will not break that promise on the most important letter I will ever send you. I am terrified. Not of you. Of us. Of the moment I step off that train and you see me. The real me. Not the woman in the letters. The woman who is smaller and plainer and more frightened than anything I've had the courage to write. What if the words were braver than I am? What if you fell in love with a woman who only exists on paper, and the real one disappoints you, and I have crossed a continent and burned my whole life down to watch your face fall? Tell me the truth back, Jacob. It's the arrangement. If you don't come to the station, I will understand. I will get back on the train. I will never write again, and I will never blame you, because a man cannot be held to a promise made to ink. But if you do come, if you're standing there when the doors open, I don't have the words for it. I who always have the words. For that one thing, I don't have them. I suppose I'll have to say it with something other than words. The 14th. The afternoon train. Yours truly, finally, terrifyingly yours, Emily. Jacob read it standing up in the post office and had to put a hand flat on the counter. Bad news, Mr. Hayes? The postmaster asked. No, Jacob said. His voice came out strange. No, it's the best news I ever had, and I've never been so scared in my life. Both. At the same time. Is there a word for that? The old postmaster considered him. There is, he said. It's called being alive, son. You've been out of practice.
Chanted to do.
The 14th was 6 days away. Jacob did not sleep more than 3 hours a night for any of them. He rebuilt the porch step that had a soft board in it because he could not have her turning her ankle on the first minute of her new life. He whitewashed the fence along the front, then decided the whitewash looked like he was trying too hard, then decided it didn't matter, then whitewashed it anyway. He aired out the room that had been Samuel's and then stood in the doorway of it for an hour, and then couldn't, and closed it again, and gave her his mother's old room instead. He didn't presume he made up a separate bed, a woman's room, a lock on the inside of the door, so she'd know she was safe. So she'd know he understood what it meant for a woman to cross a continent to a man she'd never seen. Ruth found him on the 5th night polishing his father's boots. They're your good boots, she said. They're the only good ones I've got. You've had them since Pa's funeral. You haven't worn them since. Jacob kept polishing. Seemed like the right day to bring them back out. Ruth sat down across from him, and for once she didn't tease. Are you all right, little brother? No, Jacob said honestly. I keep thinking about the box in the mud. Ruth's hands went still. Samuel, she said quietly. You mean Samuel? He said, tell Ruth, and then he stopped. 3 years I've carried that unfinished sentence. Jacob set the boot down. And now there's a woman getting on a train in Philadelphia with our whole future in her hands, and every night I think, what if she gets on the train and something happens? What if the schedule's wrong? What if her father? What if I stand on that platform and the doors open and she's not there, and that's my sentence now? Another one that never gets finished. I don't think I could carry two Ruth. I don't think a man can. Ruth came around the table and took her brother's face in both her hands the way she had when they were children, and she said, Then here is what you do. You go to that station. You stand there. And whatever happens when those doors open, whatever happens, you don't let it be an unfinished sentence. You say the whole thing, whatever it is. You say all of it out loud to her face the way you never got to with Sam. Her eyes were wet. That's the only way I know to lay a ghost. You finish the sentence yourself. Jacob nodded and could not speak, and Ruth let him not speak because she was his sister, and she knew. 2,000 miles east on the eve of the 13th, Emily Whitmore packed one bag in the dark. She left almost everything. The dresses she'd been given, the jewelry. The books, she left the books last, and it nearly broke her. Running her fingers along the spines, she'd read to pieces. She took 3, the smallest 3, the ones she loved most. She took her mother's handkerchief, though she and her mother had not truly spoken in months. She took the box of Jacob's letters, all of them, everyone wrapped in oilcloth against the weather. She was reaching for the door when the lamp bloomed behind her. Her father was sitting in the chair by the window. He had been sitting there in the dark, waiting. She didn't know how long. "Father," her voice failed her. "I could have you stopped at the station," Richard Whitmore said. He did not stand. "A word to the right man, and you'd never board the train. You know that." "Yes. I could send men after you, to Montana. I have the means." "I know that too." He looked at her for a long time, and Emily forced herself to look back, though every muscle in her body was screaming at her to run. "Your mother left her family for me," Richard said at last, and it was the last thing on earth she expected him to say. "Did you know that her people thought I was beneath them? Merchant stock. She got on a train against her father's wishes, and she never saw him again. He died refusing to forgive her." He turned his face to the dark window. "I swore I would give her the world so she'd never regret it. And somewhere in the giving, I forgot to ask her whether the world was what she wanted, or whether she'd only ever wanted the man on the platform." His jaw tightened. "I am not going to stop you at the station, Emily. I am going to sit in this chair and let you walk out that door and break my heart, because I have finally understood that I have a choice between losing you tonight or losing you the way I lost your grandfather, slowly refusing to forgive until the forgiving comes too late to do any good." Emily's hand was shaking on the doorknob. "But hear me," her father said. And now he did stand, and he crossed to her, and he did something he had not done since she was a small girl. He took her hand. "If that man out there in the dirt is not everything those letters promised, if he raises his voice to you, if he lets you go hungry, if he makes you feel the way I have made your mother feel these 30 years you write to me, one word, and I will come not to bring you home, but to stand beside you as your father should have stood all along. Do you understand me?" "Father, do you understand me?" "Yes," Emily whispered. "Yes, I understand." He let go of her hand. He stepped back into the dark. "Then go, before I lose the courage to let you." And as she opened the door, his voice came once more, rougher than she'd ever heard it. "You'll thank me in 10 years. Not for the wedding, for the chair, for staying in the chair." She did not fully understand him then. She would spend the rest of her life understanding him. The train west was 4 days of iron and coal smoke and a hard bench, and Emily Whitmore, who had never in her life traveled without a maid and a private compartment, sat that whole way, with her one bag on her lap, and her heart climbing higher into her throat with every mile. She talked herself into it and out of it 100 times. An old woman across the aisle watched her twist her hands for 2 full days before she finally spoke. "You're going to a man," she said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Nobody looks that frightened over a place. Places don't have faces." The old woman had a face like a walnut and eyes that missed nothing. "You never met him. Is it that obvious? You've read that little box of letters 4 times since Chicago. A woman doesn't reread a man she's already got." The old woman folded her hands. "You want an old fool's advice, or you want to be left alone with your worrying?" Emily managed a small laugh. "The advice, please. The worrying isn't going well." "When you get off that train," the old woman said, "don't look for the man in the letters. That man doesn't exist, not the way you've built him sitting up nights making him better than any real man could be. Look for the man who's actually standing there. Look at his hands and his eyes and whether he came at all. A man who came in the flesh on the right day with his hat in his hands and his heart in his mouth, that's worth 10 of any man on paper." She patted Emily's knee. "The letters got you on the train. But you don't marry letters. You marry the one who shows up." Emily held on to those words like a rope. She held on to them through the last night when the doubt was so bad she nearly got off at the wrong stop and turned back. She held on to them through the last morning dressing carefully in the tiny lavatory, trying to make the woman in the small clouded mirror look like someone worth crossing a continent for, and finding only her own frightened face. She held on to them as the conductor came through, calling the stops closer and closer until Cedar Hollow next and final for this line. and Emily's whole body went to ice and fire at once. She pressed her face to the glass. The town slid into view, small and rough and golden, so much smaller than any place she'd ever lived, and her heart lurched. What have I done? What have I done? I've left everything for this. And then the platform came into view, and the people on it. And Emily's eyes went hunting over every figure, every hat, every chata. Jacob had been at the station for 3 hours. The train was late, only 20 minutes, but 20 minutes when a man has already waited. 6 months feels like the 20 minutes at the end of the world. He'd worn his father's boots. He'd worn his good shirt, the one Ruth had pressed for him because his hands were shaking too badly to work the iron. He held his hat in both hands, and he had not put it down, and he had not put it on, and he did not know what to do with it, so he just held it, turning it round and round by the brim. She'll be there, Ruth had said that morning. And if she's not, I'll be at home, and you come straight to me, and we'll get through it, same as we've gotten through everything else. Same as we've gotten through everything else. Jacob thought about everything else. He thought about a horse and a boy in the mud, and a sentence with no end. He thought, if she's not on this train, that's it. That's the second one. And Ruth was wrong. A man can't carry two. And then far down the track a whistle. Every muscle in his body locked. The train came in slow, dragging its great weight, hissing, shuddering, and Jacob's eyes fixed on it, the way a drowning man fixes on the shore, and the cars slid past 1, 2, 3, and stopped and stood there breathing steam, and for one horrible, endless moment, nothing happened at all. The doors did not open. The doors did not open, and Jacob felt the whole world tilt, felt the second unfinished sentence rising up in his throat to choke him, felt his sister's voice. You say the whole thing out loud to her face, and there was no her. There was no face. There was only iron and steam and the 21st minute of the end of the world. And then, with a sound like a held breath, finally let go, the doors opened. Jacob Hayes stopped breathing entirely. Passengers began to step down. A drummer with sample cases. A family. 2 ranch hands. An old woman with a face like a walnut who paused at the bottom step and turned back to look up into the car behind her and said something Jacob couldn't hear and smiled and touched the doorframe as though giving something over. And then a woman appeared in the doorway of the train. One bag held against her chest, wrapped in oilcloth against the weather, and she stood at the top of the steps and did not come down because she was searching the platform. Searching it the way he was searching it. Her eyes moving fast over every figure, every hat, hunting terrified, hoping, and her eyes found him. Jacob had spent 6 months and 19 letters wondering what he would feel in this moment. He'd imagined it 1,000 ways on that porch talking to the empty chair. And every single one of the 1,000 ways was wrong, because none of them had prepared him for the plain and shattering fact of her that she was real, that she was here, that the woman who had reached across 2,000 miles and finished his sentences was standing 11 steps away with her whole trembling heart in her face, and she was looking at him, and she knew him. She knew him the way you know, a place you've never been but have dreamed of so long. It's already home. He did not remember deciding to move. He did not remember dropping his hat. He only knew afterward that Ruth had told him to say the whole sentence out loud to her face, and that when the moment came, he found just as Emily had written. I suppose I'll have to say it with something other than words, that there were no words at all. Not one, not from either of them. That all the tens of thousands of words they'd sent across the country had been leading the whole time to a silence that no word could ever be as true as. And Jacob Hayes, standing on the platform in his dead father's boots, with his hat in the dust at his feet, and 3 years of an unfinished sentence in his chest, opened his arms. He didn't say, come here. He didn't say, Emily. He didn't say anything. He just opened his arms and stood there shaking and waited. Waited to find out whether ink could become flesh, whether 6 months of the truth had been the truth, whether the woman at the top of the steps would look at the real and lesser man. He was afraid he'd turn out to be and get back on the train. And Emily Whitmore looked down at the man standing there with his empty open arms and his hat in the dust and his whole life offered up with nothing held back. No words, No defense. Just here I am. This is all of me. It's yours, if you'll have it. And she let go of the doorframe. She ran. Not gracefully. She nearly went down on the second step, caught herself on the rail, kicked off the shoes that had been chosen for a Philadelphia parlor and were useless on iron stairs, and came down the last 4 steps in her stockings, with her bag still clutched to her chest. And Jacob was already moving, closing the 11 steps between them, and they collided so hard that the bag was crushed between them, and neither of them cared, and his arms went around her and hers around him as best they could, with the letters pressed to both their hearts, and that was it. That was the whole sentence. 6 months of ink, 2,000 miles of iron, and it all came down to a woman shaking in a man's arms on a wooden platform. Both of them saying nothing, because there was nothing left in either language that could improve on it. When she finally pulled back far enough to look up at him, her face was wet, and she was laughing that broken laugh that comes when a body has been braced for a blow that never lands. "You came," she said. "I've been here 3 hours. The train was late." 20 minutes, his voice cracked. Felt longer. "I almost got off at Miles City." She was gripping the front of his shirt now, as if to make sure he stayed solid. "Twice. I almost turned back twice. There was an old woman, she told me, she said, 'Don't marry the man in the letters, marry the one who shows up.' I know that woman." Jacob glanced past her, but the platform behind them was emptying, and the old woman with the walnut face was already gone, folded back into the world the way such people always are. "I don't know how, but I know that woman." Emily pressed her forehead to his chest and breathed him in coal smoke and hoarse and something clean underneath soap he'd washed for her, and she said muffled, "You smell like your letters." "Letters don't smell like anything. Yours do. They smell like this." And she started crying in earnest. Then not from sadness, from the sheer unbearable relief of having been right about someone, and Jacob held her, and looked over her head at the mountains he'd promised her window would face, and thought that a man could wait 10 years for a moment like this one, and count it cheap at the price. Then he felt her go rigid in his arms. "Jacob," she whispered. "What is it? Don't turn around fast, but there's a man, by the ticket window. He's been watching us the whole time and he hasn't moved." Jacob turned around slow, the way you turn when a snake is close. The man was leaning against the ticket window in a city suit that had no business in Cedar Hollow, a bowler hat, a notebook open in one hand, and a pencil in the other. And when Jacob's eyes found him, the man did not look away. He touched the brim of his hat. He wrote something in the notebook. And then he closed it and walked off toward the town. Unhurried, a man with all the time in the world and someone else's money to spend on it. "You know him?" Jacob asked. Emily had gone pale under her tears. "No, but I know what he is. My father hires men like that, to watch, to write things down." Her hands tightened on his shirt. "Jacob, he said he wouldn't stop me at the station. He gave me his word, but he never said—" She stopped. "He never said he wouldn't have someone waiting when I arrived." And there it was, the first shadow walking off toward town, with a notebook full of the exact moment Emily Whitmore stepped off a train into the arms of a Montana cattleman to be folded into an envelope and carried 2,000 miles east to a man sitting in a chair by a dark window. Jacob felt the old cold settle into him, the same cold he'd felt reading her last letter, the best news and the worst all at once. "Let him write," Jacob said, and picked up her crushed bag and put his hat back on his head, and offered her his arm the way he was fairly sure a man was supposed to. "You're cold, and you're hungry, and you've been on a train for 4 days. Whatever that man's writing, it can wait. Let's go home." Home. He'd said it before he'd thought about it. Emily heard it, and took his arm, and something in her face steadied. "Home," she repeated like a word in a new language she was learning to trust. The ride out to Cedar Hollow was an hour in the wagon, and for the first while, neither of them knew how to be next to each other in the flesh. On paper, they had been fearless. In person, they were two shy strangers who happened to know each other's deepest wounds. This is strange, Emily said finally. What is... I know that your brother's last words were tell Ruth. I know you sleep badly in the spring because that's when he died. I know you take your coffee bitter because your mother did, and you can't stand to make it any other way now that she's gone. She looked at her hands. I know all of that, and I don't know how to sit next to you. Jacob was quiet a moment. Then, ask me something. Something small. Something you'd ask a stranger. That's silly. Humor me. We built the whole thing out of questions. Might as well keep building. Emily thought. All right. What's the horse's name? Which one? The one pulling the wagon. Duchess? Duchess! Emily started to laugh. A cattle rancher named his workhorse Duchess. Samuel named her. He was 15. Thought it was funny to put a crown on a plow horse. Jacob's mouth twitched. I kept the name. Seemed wrong to take it off her after. And just like that, the strangeness broke. Because he'd given her another true thing, small and real, and she understood that this was how it would be between them. Not the grand confessions of the letters, but this the daily handing over of small true things one at a time, until a life was built out of them. Duchess! Emily said again softer, and reached over and put her hand over his on the reins, and Jacob did not pull away, and the mountains her window would face grew larger with every turn of the wheels. Ruth was waiting on the porch when they came up the track, and she was down the steps before the wagon fully stopped. You're her, Ruth said, taking both of Emily's hands as she climbed down, holding her at arm's length to look at her, the way you'd look at a horse you were thinking of buying, except her eyes were already wet. You're really her. I've read every letter he thinks I don't know he keeps in that box. Ruth, Jacob said, warning. Well, I have. Ruth pulled Emily into a hug that lifted her half off her feet. Thank you, she whispered into Emily's ear, low enough that Jacob couldn't hear. Thank you for not turning back. You gave me my brother back. I'd almost stopped hoping. Emily didn't trust herself to answer. She just held the older woman. This stranger, who was not a stranger, and over Ruth's shoulder, she watched Jacob unloading her one small bag, with the terrible care of a man handling something precious, and she thought, I have made the best mistake of my life, or the worst. And either way, there's no train back tonight, so I had better make it the best. Come inside, Ruth said, wiping her eyes and taking charge the way she took charge of everything. I've made supper. Jacob can't cook to save his life. He'd have fed you beans out of a can on your first night, and I told him over my dead body. I can cook, Jacob protested. You can boil, Ruth said. There's a difference, and a bride ought to learn it early. Bride. The word sat in the air. They all heard it. Nobody had said the thing out loud yet. The thing the advertisement had been for the thing 6 months of letters had circled around the thing Emily had crossed a continent for. Marriage. It hung there enormous in the middle of the kitchen. Jacob set down the bag. Ruth, he said, give us the room a minute. Ruth looked between them, and something wise and quiet moved across her face, and she picked up her shawl. I'll go see the Duchess, she said. Take all the minutes you need. And she went out, and the screen door slapped, and then it was just the two of them in a kitchen that smelled of Ruth's cooking and the whole rest of their lives waiting to be decided. I have to say the true thing, Jacob started. You always do. So do you. It's the arrangement. He turned his hat in his hands. I sent for you as the advertisement said, correspondence companion. Ruth wrote it, and somewhere in 6 months it stopped being that. But I never once in any letter I never asked you the actual question because I was afraid if I put it on paper and you said no, I'd have it in writing, I'd have to read the no over and over. He made himself look at her. So I'm asking it now out loud to your face, because my sister told me a man should say the whole sentence and not leave it in the mud. He swallowed. Emily Whitmore, I didn't bring you 2,000 miles to be my companion. I brought you here because I want to marry you. If you'll have a plain man in a plain house who talks to horses more than people and sleeps bad in the spring. That's the whole sentence. That's all of it. Emily's eyes filled, and then to his complete horror she said no. The kitchen went silent. Jacob felt the floor drop out of the world. "No," he repeated. "Not yet." She crossed to him fast, took his face in her hands the way she'd been afraid to on paper. "Jacob, no, not no, listen to me. Don't look like that. I've broken your heart. Put your heart back. I mean, not yet. I've known you 6 months in ink and 6 hours in the flesh. And the whole way here, an old woman told me, you don't marry the man in the letters. You marry the one who shows up, and you showed up, and God help me. I want to say yes so badly, I can taste it." She was crying and laughing at once again. "But I have watched what happens when people marry for the idea of a person and then meet the real one. My father married the idea of my mother. I will not do to you what he did to her. So I am saying, give me a month. Let me learn the real Jacob. Let you learn the real Emily, who is smaller and plainer and more frightened than the woman on paper I warned you." "You're not smaller," Jacob said. "You're not plainer. You warned me, and you were wrong. The paper was smaller than you." Emily made a sound like her heart had cracked open. "A month," Jacob said. "You want a month. I want to be sure. Not for me. For you. I want you to be able to stand in front of that whole town and every man who bought a newspaper and say I chose her and she chose me and no one was fooled. I don't want to be your mistake, Jacob. I've spent my whole life being someone's arrangement. I would rather be your choice." Jacob looked at this woman standing in his kitchen in her stockings, having thrown away every certain thing in her life to arrive at an uncertain one, refusing the very thing she'd traveled 2,000 miles for because she wanted it to be true. And he understood all the way down that Ruth's advertisement had reached across the country and found not a companion, not a bride, but the one person alive who understood the arrangement better than he did. "A month," he agreed, and his voice was rough. "But I'm telling you now, so it's said out loud and not in the mud, a month, a year, 10 years. My answer's not going to change. I knew it when the doors opened. There wasn't a woman on that platform I could have stopped myself from. It was always going to be you." "Then you won't mind waiting a month to hear me say it back," Emily whispered. "I'll mind every minute of it," Jacob said. "But I'll wait." And Ruth, who had absolutely not gone to see the Duchess, who was standing just outside the screen door with her hand over her mouth, chose that moment to walk back in loudly and announce that the supper was getting cold, and did they intend to court each other on empty stomachs, because in her experience, love went a good deal easier with something warm in you. The month began, and whatever Jacob had imagined some gentle, cautious courtship, the reality was that Emily Whitmore threw herself at frontier life like a woman trying to outrun her old one. She could not cook. She had never in her life cooked. The first morning she tried to make coffee and produced something Jacob described tactfully as closer to tar than most, and she laughed and threw a dish rag at him and made him show her, and by the end of the week the coffee was drinkable, and by the end of the second week it was good. She could not ride. She'd sat side saddle in a Philadelphia park at a walk escorted. Jacob put her on the gentlest mare they had, and she was thrown twice in the first 3 days, and both times she got up spitting dirt and refused his hand and got back on. And the third day she stayed on, and the look on her face when she finally sat a trot without falling was worth. Jacob thought the whole 6 months of waiting. "You didn't cry," he said, riding up beside her. "I cried plenty, just in my room where you couldn't hear." "Why not out here?" Emily was quiet a moment, walking the mare. "Because my father used to say a woman who cries in front of men is asking to be managed. It's the one thing he taught me that I mean to keep." She glanced at him. "Not because it's true. Because I'd rather you saw me get up than saw me fall." "I'd rather see both," Jacob said. The whole sentence. "Remember." Emily looked at him a long moment. Then she said, "The second time I got thrown, I cried because I thought a real rancher's wife would already know how to do this. And here I am at 26, being thrown off the gentlest horse you own, and what if I'm never anything out here but the city woman who can't ride? What if I've traded being useless in a parlor for being useless on a ranch?" She said it fast, like ripping off a bandage. "There, Now you've seen the fall. Jacob reached over and stopped her mare with a hand on the bridle. Come here, he said. There's something you need to see. He rode her up to the top of the near ridge and pointed down at the ranch, spread below the house, the barn, the yards, the cattle scattered across the grass like a slow brown river. 10 years I've run this place alone, he said. 10 years I got up in the dark and worked till dark, and there was nobody to tell it, to nobody to notice if I did it well or bad, nobody the work was for. You've been here 2 weeks. He turned to look at her. The Wallace boy told me yesterday the men are working harder. You know why. Because you learn their names, you bring them coffee, and you ask about their mothers, and you notice that old Pete's got a bad hand, and you started cutting his meat at supper before he has to ask. That's not the city woman who can't ride Emily. That's the reason a place stops being a business and starts being a home. I've got 4 men who'd have quit by now in a normal year, and they're staying, and it's not for the wages. It's for the plate you set them. You think you're useless out here. He shook his head. You've done in 2 weeks what I couldn't do in 10 years. You made it worth doing. Emily didn't answer for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, Nobody has ever told me I was useful. In 26 years. They told me I was pretty and accomplished, and a credit to the family. Nobody ever once said I was useful. Her voice broke. That's the finest thing anyone's ever said to me, and it's about cutting an old man's meat. It's about a lot more than that, Jacob said. And Emily, 3 weeks earlier than either of them expected, nearly said the thing right there on the ridge. She caught it behind her teeth. A month. She'd asked for a month. But she rode down off that ridge knowing what the answer would be and knowing he knew, and the not saying it became a sweet, unbearable game between them, a held breath, both of them counting the days. 19 days in the shadow came back. It came as an ordinary thing, a rider from town. Elias Cutter, who ran the mercantile, come out on a Sunday, looking uncomfortable in his church clothes and unwilling to meet Jacob's eye. Elias, Jacob said, you don't come out here of a Sunday for the pleasure of my company. What is it? Cutter took off his hat, turned it in his hands the way Jacob himself did when the words were hard. Jacob, we've known each other 20 years. I sold your daddy his first sack of flour on credit, and I never regretted it. He worked his jaw. There's talk in town. There's always talk in town. That's what town's for. Not like this. Cutter finally looked up. There's a man come to Cedar Hollow. City man. Been buying drinks and asking questions. About you. About her. He nodded toward the house where Emily was hanging wash. And he's not asking friendly. He's telling a story while he asks it if you follow me. He's saying the whole thing's a scheme. That she's some Eastern girl who got herself in trouble, family money, and she come out here to snare a lonely rancher and get her hands on Cedar Hollow. He says her people are respectable, and she disgraced them, and you're the fool who took the bait. Cutter looked miserable. I don't believe a word of it, Jacob. I want that clear. But I've heard it 3 times this week from 3 different men, and that means it's spreading, and it means somebody's paying to spread it, because talk that organized doesn't grow wild. Jacob felt the cold come back, but this time it came with something hot underneath it. The man, Jacob said. City man, bowler hat, notebook. You know him? He was on the platform the day she came in, wrote it all down. Jacob's jaw worked. Her father, Richard Whitmore, railroad money back east. He couldn't stop her getting on the train, so he's going to make Montana too hot to hold her. Poison the well. Turn the town against her so she's got nowhere to belong but back home. He looked at Cutter. Am I right that Sanderson at the bank's been colder to me this month than he was last? Cutter's face told him everything before the man's mouth did. Sanderson called in your feed loan Thursday, Cutter said quietly. I heard it at the bank. Wanted the whole thing paid inside 60 days. That's not how Sanderson does business. He's carried men through worse winters than you've had. Somebody leaned on him. Somebody with more money than Sanderson's ever seen. He put his hat back on. I came to warn you, Jacob, not to worry you. But if a man that rich has decided to break you, I've seen it done to bigger outfits than Cedar Hollow. I'd get your affairs in order, and I'd think hard about how much fight you've got in you. He rode off, and Jacob stood in the yard a long time, and when he turned around, Emily was standing at the edge of the porch with a wet shirt in her hands and a face like she'd heard every word. She had heard every word. "How much of that did you get?" Jacob asked. "All of it." She came down off the porch slow. The loan, the talk, the man on the platform. The wet shirt hung forgotten in her hands, dripping onto her skirt. "It's him. It's my father. I know exactly what he's doing. I've watched him do it to competitors my whole life. He doesn't fight you in the open. He makes the ground fall out from under you until you fall on your own, and then he tells everyone he never touched you." Her voice was climbing. "The bank won't be the end of it. It'll be the contracts next. Your cattle buyers. Anyone who does business with you'll get a quiet word from a man they've never met, and then they'll be too busy to see you too full up to buy terribly sorry Mr. Hayes. But we're going another direction this season, Emily. And the whole time, nobody will be able to point to a single thing he's done. There won't be a fingerprint on any of it. And the town will just slowly decide that a Hayes who took up with a scheming Eastern woman brought his ruin on himself." "Emily." She stopped. "You're doing the thing," Jacob said gently, "where you carry the whole weight of it before it's even landed. You did it in your letters. You'd apologize for a wound you hadn't given yet." He crossed to her and took the wet shirt out of her hands and dropped it in the basket. "So the bank called the loan. All right, that's a real thing, and we'll deal with it as a real thing, not as the end of the world. It hasn't gotten to being yet. You don't understand what he's capable of. Then tell me. The whole sentence. Sit down on that step and tell me exactly what your father's capable of, every bit of it, worst first. And we'll look at it together in the daylight, where it can't grow bigger than it is." And she did. She sat on the mended step, the one he'd fixed, so she wouldn't turn her ankle, and she told him about Richard Whitmore, and the more she told, the quieter Jacob got, and the quieter he got, the more Emily's own fear began to shift, because a man who goes quiet, and still in the face of bad news, is a different thing entirely from a man who panics, and she had grown up around men who panicked in beautiful, expensive ways, and she had never once until this moment sat beside a man who simply listened to the whole size of the trouble and did not flinch. "There's one thing you're leaving out," Jacob said when she was done. "What?" "Your father hasn't come himself. He sent a man with a notebook, and he leaned on a banker from 2,000 miles away." Jacob looked out at the mountains. "A man who's certain doesn't do that. A man who's certain comes and takes what's his. Your father's doing all this from a distance because part of him, the part that let you get on the train, part of him isn't sure he's right. And a man who isn't sure he's right can be reached." He turned to her. "You told me in your letters he sat in a chair by the window and let you walk out and break his heart. That's not the man who's trying to ruin us. That's the same man. He's doing both at once. He let you go, and he can't stand that he let you go. So now he's trying to prove to himself that letting you go was a tragedy and not a choice. Because if it was your choice, then he was wrong, and Richard Whitmore has never once in his life been wrong." Emily stared at him. "You've never met my father," she said slowly, "and you just described him more truly than I could after 26 years. I've buried 3 people I loved," Jacob said. "You learn to read grief in a man even when it's wearing a suit and calling itself something else. Your father's grieving you, Emily, alive and grieving you. And a grieving man does terrible things to keep from feeling the grief." He stood and pulled her up after him. "Which means we don't fight him the way he fights. We don't sneak and lean and poison. We do the one thing a man like that can't answer. We tell the truth so loud and so plain that his lies have nowhere to stand. How? I don't know yet, but I know it's not by you packing a bag and creeping off to protect me, which is what you were already halfway to deciding to do. I can see it on you." He held her by both shoulders. "So say it now out loud, so I don't have to worry about it in the night. Say you won't run to save me." Emily's eyes filled. He'd read her exactly. It was already forming in her the old shape of it. "I'll leave. I'll go home. I'll marry Charles. I'll give my father his tragedy and set Jacob free before I cost him everything." And Jacob had seen it coming the way he saw weather. I can't watch you lose it all because of me, she whispered. Then don't watch me lose it. Watch me keep it. With you. His grip tightened. Say it, Emily, the whole sentence. Say you won't run. And this was the moment she felt it. This was the moment where the month didn't matter anymore, where the careful counting of days fell away, because you cannot promise a man you'll stay through his ruin and still pretend you haven't already given him your whole heart. I won't run, Emily said. Say the rest of it. That's not fair. I asked for a month. The month's for you, not me. You want to be sure. But I already saw you decide to leave to protect me, which means you love me enough to lose me, and a woman doesn't feel that over ink. He was almost smiling even now, even with the bank and the notebook and the whole shadow closing in. So you don't have to say the wedding word. Just say the true one. You promised me the true one. Emily looked at him for a long moment. The whole town turning against her. A man with a notebook. Her father's long reach curling around this good plain life like a fog. Every certain thing she'd ever known gone, and nothing certain left in all the world except, I love you, Emily said. There, that's the true one. I've loved you since the letter about the chair that faces the mountains. I loved you before I got off the train, and I loved you more when you dropped your hat, and I loved you most just now when you didn't flinch. I love you, Jacob Hayes. And I am not going to run, and I am not going to marry Charles Pemberton, and if my father takes every acre of Cedar Hollow, I will love you on whatever's left, even if it's just the mended step. Jacob closed his eyes. 3 years of an unfinished sentence, and this was how it finally ended. Not with his brother's last words, which he'd never have, but with a woman on a mended step giving him the whole thing, all of it, out loud to his face. Then let him come, Jacob said, and pulled her in and held her the way he'd held her on the platform the whole sentence, nothing held back. Let him bring his lawyers and his notebooks and his money. He's already lost the only thing he came for. He came to prove you'd made a mistake. He pressed his mouth to her hair. And you just told the whole ranch you'd rather have a mended step with me than a mansion with him. There's no lie in the world big enough to stand up against that. They stood in the yard a long time, the wash forgotten, the sun going down behind the mountains her window faced. And Ruth, watching from the barn door, wiped her eyes and did not interrupt this time, and thought about a boy in the mud and a sentence that never finished, and thought that maybe the way you laid a ghost was not to finish the old sentence at all, but to start a new one and mean it all the way to the end. But 2,000 miles east, in a study lined with books no one read for pleasure. Richard Whitmore was reading a report from a man with a notebook. Subject embraced the rancher openly on the platform. Subject appears to have refused nothing. Local sentiment beginning to turn per instruction. Bank cooperating, and he set it down, and he looked at the empty chair by the window where he'd sat, and let his daughter go, and something in his face was not triumph. Something in his face was a man who had gotten exactly what he'd paid for, and was only now too late beginning to understand what it was going to cost him. He rang the bell on his desk. "Have my private car readied," Richard Whitmore said when the man appeared. "And wire ahead to Cedar Hollow. I'll be going to Montana myself." The wire reached Cedar Hollow 3 days before the man himself. It came to the telegraph office, and the telegraph office was run by a man named Fenwick, who could not keep a secret if his life hung on it. And so by noon, the whole town knew that Richard Whitmore of Philadelphia, the name they'd been hearing whispered in the saloon for a month, the money behind the bowler hat and the notebook, was coming to Cedar Hollow in a private railcar in person. Emily heard it from Ruth, who heard it from the Wallace boy, who heard it from Fenwick's own mouth. "He's coming himself," Emily said. She'd gone the color of ash. "Jacob, he's coming himself." Jacob was mending harness in the barn. He didn't stop. "You told me he never came himself. You told me that was how I knew he wasn't sure. That was when he was leaning on us from a distance. If he's coming himself..." She pressed her hand to her mouth. "It means the distance stopped being enough. It means I didn't turn back, and the bank didn't break you fast enough, and now he's going to do the thing he does when the quiet way fails." "Which is what?" "He comes in person, and he offers money," Emily said. "That's his last move and his surest one. He's never once had to go past it. He'll offer you more money than you've ever seen to let me go, and he'll do it kindly. He'll do it like he's rescuing you and Jacob." Her voice dropped. "He will offer you enough to save Cedar Hollow. He'll make it so that keeping me costs you the ranch and giving me up saves it. That's how he wins. He doesn't make you choose between money and me. He makes you choose between me and everything your family died for." Jacob set the harness down. "That's a specific fear," he said quietly. "You've watched him do exactly that. To my mother's brother, my Uncle Thomas." Emily sat down hard on a hay bale. "Thomas married a woman my grandfather didn't approve of. And my father, this was before he softened. If he's softened at all, my father bought up Thomas's debts quiet over a year and then sat him down and said, 'I'll forgive every dollar the day she's gone. Choose.' And Thomas—" She stopped. "Thomas chose the money, and he lived 30 more years rich and hollowed out, and he drank himself into the ground. And at his funeral my father said what a shame it was, a man with everything, and never once admitted he was the one who'd made Thomas trade the everything that mattered for the everything that didn't." She looked up. "That's who's coming. And he's very, very good at it." Jacob crossed the barn and crouched in front of her, so she had to look at him. "Then here's a true thing," he said. "There isn't a number he can name. You say that now. There isn't a number, Emily, because he's got the arithmetic wrong and he doesn't know it. He thinks the ranch is what my family died for. It isn't. My family died and left me the ranch, and I ran it 10 years like a man tending a grave. You're the first thing that's happened to Cedar Hollow that's about living and not about dying. So when your father sits me down and offers me the ranch back in exchange for you, he's going to think he's offering me my whole family, and what he's actually offering me is the grave and asking me to climb back into it." He took her hands. "I already lived in the grave for 10 years. I'm not going back for money, not for any number. Let him name it. I want to see his face when it doesn't work because I don't think anyone's ever let him find out it doesn't work." Emily searched his face for the flinch, the hesitation, the small tell that every man she'd ever known had eventually shown when enough money was on the table. She didn't find it. "You frighten me a little," she said, "when you get like this." "Good," Jacob said. "Save some of the frightened for your father. He's going to need to see it on somebody." Richard Whitmore's rail car arrived on a Tuesday. He did not come out to the ranch. That was the first move, and Jacob understood it as a move. The man took rooms at the Cedar Hollow Hotel, the best it had, which wasn't much, and he let it be known that Mr. Whitmore would receive Mr. Hayes at his convenience. He made Jacob come to him. He made Cedar Hollow watch Jacob come to him. "Don't go," Ruth said. "Make him come to us. It's our ground." "No," Jacob said, putting on his good shirt, the one he'd worn to the station. "He wants the town to see me walk into that hotel like a man summoned. So I'll walk in like a man who's got nothing to hide and nothing to fear, and I'll let the town see that instead. You can't win a fight about how a thing looks by refusing to be looked at." "I'm coming with you," Emily said. "No. He's my father. He's your father, and that's exactly why you're not coming." Jacob buttoned the shirt. "If you're in the room, everything I say he'll hear as a man fighting for a prize. If it's just me and him man to man, then whatever I say he has to hear is the truth, because there's nobody there for me to perform it to." He came and kissed her forehead. "Trust me to go say the whole sentence, Emily, to his face, the way you taught me." She let him go. It was the hardest thing she'd done since the train. Why? Richard Whitmore was smaller than Jacob expected. That was the thing that struck him walking into the hotel room, the man behind a month of ruin, the money that had turned a whole town. The long reach that had followed his daughter across a continent was a spare gray man of 60, sitting very straight in a chair by the window, and Jacob thought he's sitting by the window. Even here. He found the chair by the window, and he sat in it. "Mr. Hayes." Whitmore did not rise. "Sit down. I'll stand." "As you like." Whitmore studied him with eyes that had appraised 1,000 men across 1,000 tables. "You're not what I expected. You had a man watch me for a month and write it all down. I'd have thought you'd know exactly what to expect. Reports tell you what a man does. They don't tell you what he is." Whitmore gestured again at the empty chair. "Sit down, Mr. Hayes. I dislike bargaining with a man who's standing. It suggests he's about to bolt." "Then we're square," Jacob said, "because I dislike bargaining at all. But I'll hear you out. Say your piece." And Richard Whitmore said his piece. He said it well. Emily had warned him, and still Jacob was almost impressed at how well the man did it. How he never once called Emily a fool or a schemer, never insulted her, spoke of her the whole time with a father's wounded tenderness that was, Jacob slowly realized, entirely real. That was the terrible part. The man wasn't lying. He believed every word. "She is a romantic," Whitmore said. "She has always been a romantic. She reads too much, and she feels too much, and she has spent her whole life certain that somewhere out past the world she was born to, there is a truer, realer life waiting. You are that life to her, Mr. Hayes. You are the far horizon. And I don't blame you for it. I don't even blame her for it, but I have lived 60 years, and I will tell you what a far horizon becomes when you finally reach it." He leaned forward. "It becomes the ground under your feet, ordinary, muddy, cold in the winter. And then she'll look up from the mud one day and see a new horizon further out, and she'll wonder what she gave up to stand in this one, and she will not say it to you. She's too kind, but she will feel it, and you will watch her feel it for 40 years. He sat back. "I am not here to break you. I am here to save you both a slow tragedy. Let me take her home, and I'll not only leave Cedar Hollow standing, I'll set it on a foundation your father never dreamed of. Clear the bank, guarantee your contracts, a working line of credit at terms no cattleman in this territory could get. You'd be the biggest outfit between here and Miles City within 5 years. He named the number. It was an enormous number. It was Jacob understood precisely the number. Emily had said it would be, not enough to make him rich, but exactly enough to make refusing it look like madness. Enough to save everything. Enough that any reasonable man in the whole territory would call him a fool for turning it down. The room was very quiet. "You've done this before," Jacob said finally. "I beg your pardon. A man named Thomas, your wife's brother. You bought his debts and you offered to forgive them the day his wife was gone." Jacob watched the older man's face. "He took the money. Emily told me. She told me he drank himself dead over 30 years, and you stood at his funeral and called it a shame." For the first time, something moved behind Richard Whitmore's composure. "She told you about Thomas," he said. "She warned me you'd do to me exactly what you did to him, word for word near enough. Buy the debt, then offer to forgive it for the price of the woman." Jacob took a step closer. "So I've had 3 days to think about my answer, and here it is, and I want you to hear all of it, because I understand you're a man who leaves before people finish their sentences, and I'm not going to let you leave before I finish mine." Whitmore's jaw tightened, but he didn't get up. "You said you're saving us a slow tragedy," Jacob said, "but you already watched the fast version, and you called it a shame at a funeral. Thomas didn't die of his wife, Mr. Whitmore. Thomas died of the day he let you make him choose. You didn't ruin him with the debt. You ruined him with the choice. You made a man look at the person he loved and put a price on her, and no man survives having done that. Whichever way he chooses, the one who takes the money hates himself till he dies, and I expect the one who keeps the woman would have spent his life afraid you'd come back and make him choose again." He shook his head slowly. "That's your real trade. It was never money for a woman. It's money for a man's soul, and you've been buying them so long you've forgotten that's what's on the table." "You're a philosopher," Whitmore said, and there was an edge in it now. "No. I'm a man who buried his whole family, and his own hope with them, and then a woman I'd never met wrote me a letter about being buried under a stone with the wrong name on it, and she reached down into the grave I was living in, and she pulled me out." Jacob's voice didn't rise, but it filled the room. "You're offering me my ranch back. You think that's my family. It isn't. My family's in the ground. What you're actually offering me is the grave I lived in for 10 years dressed up as a rescue. And I'm telling you no. Not because the number's too small, Because I already know exactly what your money buys, and I've lived in it, and I'm not going back." Whitmore was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You'll lose the ranch." "Maybe." "There's no maybe. I've broken bigger men over smaller matters. The bank's mine now. The contracts will go next. Within the year you'll have nothing but her, and let me tell you what a woman raised in comfort does when there's nothing left but a man and a hard winter. She stays," Jacob said. "She already told the whole ranch she'd rather have a mended porch step with me than a mansion with you. Said it in the yard out loud in front of my sister and the hired men. You want to know what your money's up against, Mr. Whitmore? It's up against a woman who'd already thrown it away once before I ever asked her to." And there, for the first time in the whole conversation, Richard Whitmore looked away. He looked out the window at the chair by the window that he wasn't sitting in this time, and Jacob watched a crack open in the gray, composed face, and understood that he'd finally said the one true thing the man had crossed a continent to avoid hearing. "She'd rather have the step," Whitmore repeated. "She would, and I think you knew she would. I think that's why you came yourself instead of sending the notebook." Jacob picked up his hat. "You didn't come to buy me, Mr. Whitmore. A man who came to buy me would have done it by wire like he did the bank. You came 2,000 miles to look at the man your daughter chose over you because some part of you needs to know whether she chose wrong. Because if she chose wrong, then you were right to try and stop her. And if she chose right, get out," Whitmore said. "If she chose right, then you spent a month trying to ruin the one thing that ever made her happy, and you did it out of grief, because you can't stand that she found something worth leaving you for." Jacob put his hat on. "I'll go. But you asked what I am, and now you know. I'm the man who's not going to make her choose. That's the whole difference between us. You spent your life making people choose between you and what they loved. I'm never once going to make her choose between me and you. She can have us both if you'll allow it. That's the only offer on the table I'm making, and it's the only one you can't buy your way out of." He walked to the door. "Hayes." Jacob stopped, hand on the knob. "The number?" Whitmore said. He hadn't turned from the window. "You didn't even ask me to say it twice. Every man I've ever made that offer to everyone asked me to say the number again, to be sure they'd heard it right. You didn't." His voice was strange. "Why not?" "Because I heard it fine the first time," Jacob said. "It just wasn't for sale, so there wasn't any point in hearing it twice." And he opened the door and walked out into the street where half of Cedar Hollow was pretending not to watch, and he did not hurry, and he did not slump, and he let every last one of them see a man walk out of that hotel with his hat on straight. He was 2 miles out of town, riding home, when the rider caught up to him. It was one of Whitmore's men, not the notebook man, another one, younger, out of breath. "Mr. Hayes, Mr. Whitmore sent me." The young man held out a folded paper. "He said to give you this and to wait for no answer." Jacob took it, unfolded it. It was a bank draft, the full number, the enormous number made out in his name. Unconditional, no strings, no mention of Emily at all. And beneath it, in a spare hard hand, not to give her up. "That offer's withdrawn. You were right, and I'll not insult you with it again. This is to save the ranch. Take it or don't. A man who won't sell his soul shouldn't have to lose his home to prove it. R.W." Jacob sat his horse in the middle of the road and read it 3 times. Then he folded it back up and handed it to the young man. "Tell him no," Jacob said. The young man gaped. "Sir, it's do you know how much?" "I know exactly how much. Tell him it's a fine gift and it comes from a good place, and that's exactly why I can't take it." Jacob thought a moment. "Tell him this word for word. If you saved the ranch for me, then I kept my home because of your money, and every acre of it will remind Emily that her father bought back the life she chose, and you'll have made her choose all over again between being grateful to you and being free with me. Keep your draft. I'd rather lose the ranch clean than keep it owing you the one thing you can't help charging interest on." Jacob looked at the young man. "You get all that?" Most of it, sir." "Then get the rest of it from asking him what it means. Ride on." And the young man rode off with the draft bewildered, and Jacob turned Duchess toward home, and did not feel as a sensible man should have felt that he'd just thrown away the salvation of everything his family had built. He felt riding home in the failing light lighter than he'd felt in 10 years. Emily was on the porch when he rode up, and she'd been on the porch, he could tell, since the moment he'd left that morning. "Tell me," she said before he was even down. "Tell me all of it, don't soften it." He offered the number, exactly like you said. The ranch, the bank, the contracts, all of it for you. Emily closed her eyes. "And?" "I said no." "And he threatened to break you, to take everything." "He did. And?" Jacob climbed the steps. "And then, 2 miles out of town, he sent a man after me with a bank draft for the whole number. No strings. Not for you at all. Just to save the ranch because—" Jacob's voice caught unexpectedly. "Because he said a man who won't sell his soul shouldn't have to lose his home to prove it." Emily's hand went to her mouth. "That's Jacob. That's not my father. Does not do that. He does not give money without a hook in it. He's never once in his life—" "I know. I could feel it wasn't a hook. That's why I turned it down too." "You turned that down?" Emily's voice cracked. "Jacob, that was if it truly had no strings. That was him. That was the closest thing to an apology my father has ever offered another human being. That was him trying to—" "I know what it was." Jacob took both her hands. "That's exactly why I couldn't take it. Emily, listen to me. If I take his money and save the ranch, then every morning for the rest of our lives, you wake up in a house your father paid for after he tried to ruin us. And some part of you, not because you're weak, because you're good, some part of you starts feeling you owe him. And the next time he asks you to come home for Christmas, or bring the children east, or just to visit, it won't be a father asking a daughter. It'll be a creditor calling a marker. He'll have his hook in after all, and he won't even have to have meant to put it there." Jacob shook his head. "He made the apology I never thought he'd make. And the only way I can honor it, the only way I can prove I heard it, is to not take the money, so that whatever happens between you and him from here on out is clean, free, not bought." He looked at her steadily. "I'd rather lose the ranch and let you have a real father back than keep the ranch and turn him back into a creditor. That's the trade I made today, Emily. I need you to tell me you understand it because I made it for you, and I made it without asking." Emily stared at him for a long, long moment. And then she did something that frightened him worse than her father ever had. She started to laugh and cry both at once, and she couldn't stop, and she sank down onto the mended step with her face in her hands. And when she finally got words out, they came broken and half hysterical. Jacob, you don't understand what you've done. You didn't just refuse the money. My whole life, I have watched everyone around my father either take his money and lose their soul, or refuse it and lose everything else. Those were the only 2 endings. Uncle Thomas' business partners, my own mother in 100 small ways. Take it and be hollow, or refuse it and be crushed. And you. She looked up, streaming incandescent. You found the 3rd thing. You refused the money, and you refused to hate him. You turned him down, and you handed him back his own dignity in the same breath. Nobody has ever done that to my father. Not once, in 60 years. She grabbed the front of his shirt. You may have just lost us the ranch. And I have never loved you more. And I have never been more sure I was right to get off that train than I am at this exact moment watching you throw away everything my family built to give me back a father who doesn't own me." Jacob knelt down on the step in front of her. "Then it was worth it," he said simply. "Ranch or no ranch, it was worth it." But 2,000 miles was no longer the distance between them because Richard Whitmore had not gone back to his rail car. He had sent the young man out with the draft, and then he had sat alone in the hotel room in a chair that was not by the window because he had deliberately this once moved it, and he had waited for the draft to come back. He was almost certain it would come back, and when the young man returned breathless and repeated as much of Jacob's message as he could remember, I'd rather lose the ranch clean than keep it owing you. The one thing you can't help charging interest on." Richard Whitmore sat for a very long time in the chair that was not by the window. Then he did something his daughter would not have believed. He took out paper and he began slowly in his spare hard hand to write a letter. Not to Jacob, not to the bank, not to his lawyers, to Emily. The first letter he had written his daughter in his life that was not an instruction. He got as far as, "My dear Emily, I have made a study of being right, and I find at 60 that I have never once studied being kind, and I begin to suspect they are not the same subject." And then he stopped, because his hand was shaking, and Richard Whitmore had not wept since his own father died, refusing to forgive him, and he was appalled to discover that he was weeping now. He did not finish the letter that night. But he folded it, and he put it in his breast pocket over the heart he had spent 60 years pretending was strictly a pump. And in the morning, instead of ordering his rail car east instead of calling the bank, instead of a single one of the moves that had made him what he was, Richard Whitmore put on his coat and asked the hotel man for directions and set out alone on the road to Cedar Hollow Ranch, to do the one thing he had never done in his life. To arrive somewhere uninvited with nothing to offer and simply ask to be let in. They saw the rider coming a long way off. Ruth spotted him first from the barn and came at a fast walk to the porch where Jacob and Emily were still sitting on the mended step. "There's a man on the road, alone. On a hired horse by the way he's sitting at a man who doesn't ride much." She shaded her eyes. "Coming slow? Coming like he's not sure he'll be welcome." Emily stood up. She knew before she could make out his face. She knew from the way he sat the horse, too straight, too formal a city man's back, and she knew from the thing Ruth had said, without knowing what she was saying, coming like he's not sure he'll be welcome. "It's my father," Emily said. Jacob was on his feet at once. "Alone, no lawyers, no notebook man. Alone." Emily's voice had gone strange and flat. "He's never been anywhere alone in his life. He travels with men the way other people travel with luggage." Her hands had started to shake. "Jacob, I turned down his money through you, not 2 hours ago. I told a whole ranch I'd choose a mended step over his mansion, and now he's riding up my road alone, and I don't know if he's coming to threaten me, or disown me, or nothing," Jacob said. "You don't know, so don't decide it before he's off the horse. You taught me that. Look at the man who actually shows up, not the one you've built." Emily let out a breath that shook the whole way. "Do you want me to stand with you?" Jacob asked. "Or do you want the yard to yourself?" And that the asking, when every other man in her life would simply have decided, steadied her more than anything he could have said. "Stand with me," she said. "But let me speak first. Whatever he's come to do, let me be the one who speaks first." Richard Whitmore came up the last of the track and stopped his horse a careful distance from the porch, and he did not dismount right away. He looked at the ranch, the house plain and sound, the barn, the mended step, the 3 people standing in the yard watching him, his daughter in a dress with the sleeves rolled up and dirt on the hem, looking healthier and harder and more alive than he had seen her in 20 years. The tall gray-eyed rancher beside her, who had refused his money twice in one afternoon. And a stern older woman he took to be the sister standing a little apart with her arms crossed like a sentry. Then slowly, stiffly, a man who plainly had not been on a horse in 20 years, Richard Whitmore climbed down. "Emily," he said. "Father." They stood 10 feet apart in the yard, and for a moment none of the old arithmetic worked. There was no table between them, no lawyers, no chair by a window, none of the machinery he'd spent his life operating from behind, just a father and a daughter in the dirt. I owe Mr. Hayes an apology," Richard said. His voice was not steady. "I came to make it. And I find standing here that I owe you a great deal more than an apology, and I have never learned the words for the larger thing, so you'll have to forgive me if I do it badly." "Say it however you can," Emily said. "You taught me to say the true thing. Say the true thing." Richard looked at her, and something in the old face came apart. "I tried to ruin the man you love," he said. I leaned on his bank, and I poisoned his town, and I sent a man to write down the moment you stepped off the train, so I could use it against you, and I did all of it telling myself I was saving you. And then I sat in that hotel, and I offered him money to give you up, and your Mr. Hayes, he stood in front of me, and he told me what I was. He told me about Thomas. He told me I'd spent my whole life making people choose between me and what they loved, and that he was the one man who wouldn't make you choose. He said you could have you both, him and me, if I'd allow it. Richard's voice broke fully now. Nobody has ever offered me that, Emily, in 60 years. Everyone I ever cornered either bought their way free of me or got crushed. Nobody ever once said you don't have to lose her, you fool, you're doing this to yourself. He said it. A cattleman I tried to destroy said it, and he was kinder to me in the saying than I have been to anyone in my life. Emily's eyes were streaming, but she did not move toward him. Not yet. I sent him a bank draft, Richard went on, to save the ranch. No conditions. I thought that was a generous thing, a decent thing. I was quite proud of myself for it. And he sent it back, and he sent a message, and the message was... The old man's mouth trembled. That if he took my money, he'd keep the ranch owing me, the one thing I can't help charging interest on. And I sat there, Emily. I sat in that chair, and I understood that my own daughter's husband had just refused to let me buy my way back into your life because he was protecting you. From me. From the hook I put in everything I give. He pressed his hand to his chest. And I realized I had a choice. I could go home and be right. I've always been right. Being right is the only thing I've ever been. Or I could get on a horse. I don't know how to ride and come out here uninvited and empty-handed with nothing to offer and no leverage and no way to make anyone do anything and simply ask. To be let in. To be, if you'll have me, and I'd understand entirely if you won't, your father. Not the man who arranges your life, just your father. He reached into his breast pocket and took out a folded paper and held it out. I started to write you this last night. The first letter I've ever written you that wasn't an instruction. I couldn't finish it. My hand wouldn't... I couldn't see the paper. He held it out across the 10 feet between them. It's not finished. I don't know how it ends. I thought maybe I'd finish it out loud if you'd let me. In front of you. To your face. He swallowed. Your husband told me I'm a man who leaves before people finish their sentences. I've come to finish one, Emily, for once in my life. Etched. Emily crossed the 10 feet. She did not run the way she'd run to Jacob on the platform. This was a different thing, older and heavier. 26 years of it. But she crossed the distance, and she took the unfinished letter from his shaking hand, and she read the one line he'd managed. My dear Emily, I have made a study of being right, and I find at 60 that I have never once studied being kind, and I begin to suspect they are not the same subject. She read it twice. Finish it, she whispered. Out loud, like you said. Richard Whitmore looked at his daughter, and then past her at the rancher standing quiet in the yard, and at the mended step, and the plain sound house, and the whole living breathing thing his daughter had chosen over everything he'd ever offered her. And he understood finally, all the way down what she had crossed a continent to find, because he was standing in the middle of it. They are not the same subject, he said, his voice cracking on every word. I have been right about a great many things, and it has cost me everyone I ever loved. I was right about your mother's family, and I let her grieve her father alone. I was right about Thomas, and I watched him die of it. I was right about Charles Pemberton being a good match, and I never once asked whether he was a good man. And I would have been right about this too. I'd have taken you home and married you to a fortune, and been right all the way to my grave, and you'd have been buried under a stone with the wrong name on it. Emily made a sound. He'd read her letters. He knew about the stone. And I'd have called it a good life, a sensible life, and never once known I'd murdered the only true thing in you. He was weeping openly now, this Iron Man in the dirt of a Montana ranch yard. That's the end of the sentence, Emily. I came 2,000 miles to tell you that I was going to be right about you, and that being right about you would have killed you, and that a cattleman I tried to ruin saw it in an afternoon, and I couldn't see it in 26 years. I don't want to be right anymore. I want to be your father. And I don't know how, I genuinely don't know how I never learned, but I'd like to try if there's any of the time left that I didn't already waste." And Emily Whitmore put her arms around her father for the first time since she was a small girl and held him while he shook. And over his shoulder she looked at Jacob, who stood in the yard with his hat in his hands, letting them have it, not intruding on it, the way he'd let her have the platform, the way he'd let her speak first, the way she understood now. He would let her have everything all her life, because a man who won't make you choose is a man who gives you back every part of yourself he could have kept for himself. Tarkove. Ruth, of course, made supper, because whatever else was happening in the world in Ruth's understanding of it, a man who had ridden a long way ought to be fed, even a man who'd spent a month trying to ruin her brother. And she said so loudly, banging pots, and the ordinariness of it, the sheer domestic clatter of it, did more to bring the four of them down out of the heights of the yard than any amount of talking could have. They ate at the table where Jacob had once set one plate. There were 4 now. Emily had counted them out without thinking, and only realized after looking at the table that she'd set her father a place in the house he'd tried to take. Richard Whitmore ate ranch food off a tin plate and did not complain, and asked Ruth how the biscuits were made and listened to the answer. "There's still the matter of the bank," Jacob said partway through, because a man couldn't let a thing sit unspoken at his own table. "You called the loan, Mr. Whitmore. 60 days. That clock's still running whether we're friendly at supper or not." Richard set down his fork. "I'll wire Sanderson in the morning. Reinstate the loan on the old terms. Undo all of it, the contract's the talk. I know the men I paid to spread it. I'll pay them twice as much to spread the truth, which they'll find distasteful as liars always do. A ghost of the old dryness. I can undo the machinery haze. That much I can do. It's the only kind of power I've got that's worth anything, and I'd like to spend it cleaning up my own mess." "I'm grateful," Jacob said, "but I won't take the draft. That still stands. Reinstate the loan on the terms any cattleman could get, and I'll pay it back myself dollar by dollar, same as I would have before you ever came. I'll take your help undoing the harm. I won't take your money keeping the ranch. There's a difference, and I need there to be a difference for Emily's sake." Richard looked at him for a long moment. "You know," he said, "I've employed a great many men who were called shrewd. Hard bargainers. Men who could squeeze a nickel till the buffalo bled." He picked his fork back up. "I don't believe I've ever met a man who understood money as well as you do. Hayes and I include myself in that. You understand the one thing about it that I spent 60 years not understanding. You understand what it costs the person who takes it." He nodded slowly. "The loan gets reinstated tomorrow, on the terms any cattleman could get, and I'll not offer you the draft again, but I'll tell you what I will do, and you can't refuse it because it's not for you." He turned to Emily. "The egg money. The pennies you hid for years without knowing why. You told me once you didn't know why you were saving them." He reached into his coat and drew out a second paper. This one, an official thing sealed. "Your grandmother left you money, Emily. Your mother's mother. She left it to you in trust, to come to you at 30 or on your marriage, whichever came first, and she left instructions that I was not to touch it or influence it. I have honored that. It is yours free and clear, and it is a great deal more than pennies, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with me. I couldn't put a hook in it if I wanted to. The old woman saw to that. She never did trust me." He slid it across the table. "It's your money, not mine. Do with it what you like. Save the ranch or don't. Start your school or don't. But no one, not me, not your husband, not anyone gets to tell you what it's for. That was your grandmother's whole point in tying my hands. I understand her point rather better now than I did." Emily stared at the sealed paper. "You could have given me this any time," she said slowly. "It was mine. You could have told me about it before the wedding to Charles, before any of it." "Yes," Richard said. "I could have. I didn't because a daughter with her own money is a daughter who can leave, and I wanted, God forgive me, I wanted you to have to choose me because you had nowhere else to go. The admission cost him visibly. That's the last true thing I've got, Emily, and it's the ugliest. I kept your own grandmother's money from you so that you'd need me. And you left anyway, with nothing. You left with hidden pennies and got on a train, and I have never in my life been so angry, or I understand now, so proud. His voice failed. Take the money. It's an apology I can't put into words, so I'll put it into the one language I actually speak. Take it and be free of me, so that whatever you choose from here, this ranch, this man, this school, you keep writing about in the letters. I had no right to read, you'll know you chose it free. The way you got off that train free. I'd like just once to have helped you toward freedom instead of away from it. Nobody spoke for a while. It was Ruth in the end who broke it. Ruth, who had lost a mother and a father and a brother in that house, who understood better than anyone at the table what it cost to sit at it and mean it. She reached over and put her hand on Richard Whitmore's arm. This man she'd been ready to hate an hour ago. You're a hard man who's trying to be a soft one late in the day, Ruth said. I know something about that. My brother was one till she came. It's not too late. It's later than you'd like, but it's not too late. The trick is you have to keep doing it after tonight. Any man can weep at a supper table once. The soft part is the mornings after, when nobody's watching and there's no letter to finish and you have to just keep choosing it. She patted his arm and took her hand back. More biscuits. And Richard Whitmore, railroad money, 60 years of being right, looked at this plain, fierce woman offering him more biscuits and said, Yes, thank you. They're the best thing I've eaten in 20 years. And meant it, and Ruth gave him 3. Later, when Richard had been sent to town with the promise to come back the next day when the dishes were done and the lamp burned low, Emily found Jacob out on the porch in the dark, sitting in the chair that faced the mountains. She sat down in the other one. The one he'd said was hers. The one that faced the mountains too. You never asked what's in the sealed paper, she said. How much it is. None of my business. You're my well. You will be. It'll be your business soon enough. No, Jacob said. It'll be your money in a house we share. That's a different thing than my business. Your father spent his whole life not understanding the difference. I don't aim to make his mistake. He was quiet a moment. Whatever's in it, it's yours. Save the ranch with it if you want. Don't if you don't. I meant what I told him. I'd rather lose the place clean than owe him. But if you want to spend your own money, your grandmother's money, he couldn't touch. That's not owing him anything. That's you. And I'd never tell you what to do with a thing that's yours. He turned to look at her in the dark. Though I'll say this. You've been talking about a school since your 3rd letter. Frontier children who can't read. I've got 40 acres near the creek doing nothing. Just throwing it out. In case you were wondering what a man thinks, since you asked. Emily started to laugh softly in the dark. You'd give up 40 acres for a school, for your school. There's a difference. He reached over and found her hand. Everything's got your name on it before I even do it now, Emily. That's what's happened to me. I go to fix the far fence, and I think she'll want the gate on the east side so she can see the mountains riding out. I go to buy stock, and I think she'll want to name a horse something ridiculous like her workhorse Duchess. I've stopped being able to do a single thing on this whole ranch without you being in it. His voice went rough. Your father asked me in that hotel what I am. I told him I'm the man who won't make you choose. But that's only half of it. The other half is I'm the man who can't tell where I stop and you start anymore, and I stopped wanting to be able to a long time ago, somewhere around the letter about the chair. The month was up in 4 days. They both knew it. Emily looked out at the mountains. Her window faced the mountains he'd promised her before he'd ever seen her face. And she thought about a father who'd ridden a horse he couldn't ride. To say a sentence he'd never learned. And a sister who measured love in biscuits, and a bank draft refused twice and 40 acres by a creek with her name already on them, and a man beside her in the dark who couldn't tell where he stopped, and she started. Jacob, she said. I don't want to wait the 4 days. He went very still. I asked for a month so I could be sure, Emily said. I've been sure since the ridge when you told me I was useful. I've been sure since the platform. God help me, I've been sure since the chair that faces the mountains, and I only asked for the month because I was frightened of being as sure as I was." She turned to him in the dark. "Ask me again. The whole sentence. The way you did in the kitchen. Ask me and don't leave any of it in the mud this time." And Jacob Hayes, who had buried 3 people and lived 10 years in a grave and been pulled out of it by a woman's handwriting, got down out of the chair that faced the mountains and knelt in front of the chair that was hers and took both her hands and said the whole sentence, all of it out loud to her face, with nothing held back and nothing left for later. And this time, Emily Whitmore said yes. They were married 11 days later on the porch in front of the mountains. Emily had wanted it there, and not in the church in town. And when Jacob asked why, she said, "Because this is where I said yes, and this is where you knelt, and I want to make the promise standing on the same boards where I stopped being afraid of how sure I was." So the preacher came out from Cedar Hollow, and Ruth cried and pretended she wasn't, and old Pete stood at the front in a clean shirt with his bad hand held careful against his chest, and all 4 of the hired men were there, the ones who'd stayed for the plate she set them, and Richard Whitmore gave his daughter away. That was the thing the town talked about for years. Not the wedding itself, but the sight of the railroad man from Philadelphia, the one who'd tried to break the Hayes Ranch, standing on that porch in a plain suit, walking his daughter across 10 feet of pine boards to hand her to the very man he'd tried to ruin. He did it slowly. He did it with his back too straight, a city man's back, and when he reached Jacob he stopped, and he did not let go of Emily's arm right away. "I practiced what to say," Richard said low, so only the 3 of them could hear. "The whole ride out. And I find I've forgotten all of it." His voice was not steady. "So I'll just say the true thing, since that's the currency out here. I spent a month trying to take her from you. And now I'm going to spend whatever I've got left handing her to you. And I want you to know that the second is harder, and I mean it more." He put Emily's hand in Jacob's. "Take better care of her than I ever understood how." "I will," Jacob said. "I know you will. That's the part I can't forgive myself for. That I knew it in the hotel and fought it anyway." Richard stepped back. "Go on. Don't mind an old man. Marry her before I embarrass us all." And they did. Emily did not cry through the vows. She'd told Jacob beforehand she wouldn't. "I've cried enough on this ranch. I want to remember this one clear," and she didn't. Not until the very end, when the preacher said the words, and Jacob, instead of the kiss everyone was waiting for, simply opened his arms the way he had on the platform and stood there and waited. The same gesture, the same open, undefended arms. "Here I am. This is all of me. It's yours if you'll have it." And Emily stepped into them the way she'd stepped into them the first day. Except this time, there was no train, no fear, no crowd of strangers, just the 2 of them, and the mountains and the whole rest of their lives. And that was when she cried, held against his chest in front of everyone, because the first embrace had been a leap in the dark, and this one was a homecoming, and she understood standing there wrapped in him, that the title of everything that had happened to her was true. He'd fallen for her words all those months ago, across all those miles. But it was the embrace, always the embrace, that made her his, and made him hers, and made this porch a home. The years came on, the way years do out west. Hard, some of them soft, some of them, none of them wasted. Jacob paid back the loan, every dollar on the terms any cattleman could get, the way he'd sworn he would. And the day Sanderson at the bank marked it settled, Jacob rode home and put the paper in the wooden box with the letters, because it belonged there, proof that they'd kept the place clean, kept it theirs, owed to no man. Emily built her school. She used her grandmother's money for it, her own money, the money no man could put a hook in, and Jacob gave the 40 acres by the creek, and the frontier children came, the ones who'd have grown up unable to read their own names, and Emily Hayes taught them the way she'd once taught the children in Philadelphia she'd loved and been forbidden to keep loving. Except these were hers to keep. Nobody was arranging her a marriage to take her from them. Nobody was deciding her life in a single word like a shipping date. She hung a small framed thing on the schoolhouse wall where the children could see it. Not a picture. A single sentence in her own careful hand, the sentence Jacob had written her in his very first letter, the one that had wormed into her and wouldn't leave. Pretending is a kind of loneliness, worse than the real thing. The children didn't understand it. She told them they would someday, and that when they did, they should be brave enough to stop pretending. It was, she thought, the only lesson that mattered underneath all the others. Richard Whitmore came west twice a year. That was the thing nobody would have believed, least of all Richard. He kept the promise Ruth had named at the supper table, the hard one, the mornings after one. He did not come with lawyers or leverage or a single hook. He came as a grandfather eventually, because there were grandchildren by then, a boy first, then a girl, and the sight of Richard Whitmore, who had ruled a railroad sitting on the mended porch step with a small girl on his knee, teaching her to read from a book Emily set out for them, was a sight Cedar Hollow never entirely got used to. He taught the girl her letters. "Why letters, grandfather?" the child asked him once. "Mama teaches letters at the school. Why do you always want to do letters?" And Richard Whitmore, old now gray gone to white, looked over the child's head at his daughter in the doorway and said, "Because your mother and your father built this whole family out of letters, sweetheart. Out of words on paper sent across the country, one true thing at a time. I didn't understand that once. I thought words were just words. I was wrong about it the way I was wrong about nearly everything worth being wrong about." He tapped the page. "So I'd like you to be good at letters. I'd like you to know how to send a true thing to a stranger. It's the finest thing your family knows how to do, and I nearly stamped it out of the world, and now I'd like to help keep it alive. Now, this one's an A. Say it back to me." The girl said it back to him, and Emily in the doorway had to go inside for a moment. The boy in the mud was never spoken of much, but he was there always underneath. Samuel's room stayed his room for a long time, closed until the day their son turned 19 the same age, and Jacob, who had not been able to open that door for years, opened it one morning without saying anything to anyone, and aired it out, and turned it into a room for their boy. Emily found him standing in the doorway of it the way he'd once stood in the doorway, unable to go in. "Are you all right?" she asked. He said, "Tell Ruth," and he never finished it. Jacob's voice was quiet. 3 years I carried that. And then you got off a train, and I stopped needing to know the end of his sentence because I finally understood something." He turned to her. It doesn't matter what he was going to say. Tell Ruth whatever came after it was always going to be something like, "Tell Ruth I love her. Tell Ruth I'm sorry. Tell Ruth to take care of Jacob." It was always going to be love Emily. Every ending to that sentence was love. I spent 3 years afraid of not knowing, and the truth is, I always knew. The last thing my brother did on this earth was try to send love to somebody. That's the whole sentence. It was always the whole sentence. He looked back into the room. I couldn't see it until I had you. A man can't read the love in a dying boy's last words until somebody's taught him how to read love at all. You taught me. Your first letter. The chair that faces the mountains. Emily took his hand. "Tell Ruth," she said softly. "What?" "Finish it. Out loud. To her face. You told me that's how you lay a ghost. You finish the sentence yourself." She squeezed his hand. "Go find your sister and finish your brother's sentence for him. Say the love part. Say it out loud. 30 years late is still not too late." Ruth taught us that at the supper table. And Jacob went and found Ruth in the garden gray now herself, and he stood in front of her and he said, Samuel's last words were, "Tell Ruth," and I could never guess the end of it, and I've decided the end of it. He wanted me to tell you he loved you. So, 30 years late. Samuel loved you, Ruth. That's the rest of the sentence. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. And Ruth, who had lit the match, who had placed the advertisement, who had refused to bury a fourth Hayes and instead handed her brother a life. Ruth put down her spade and held her brother in the garden, and finally cried, without pretending she wasn't. Emily found the wooden box on an evening near the end of a good long life. She wasn't looking for it. She was looking for a spool of thread, and there it was, in the bottom of the chest, her mother's box, the only thing on the ranch Jacob had ever locked, and it wasn't locked anymore because it hadn't needed locking in 40 years. She lifted the lid, and there they all were. Every letter. 19 from that first summer, and hundreds after, and the settled bank paper, and the unfinished letter. Her father had written her the night before he rode out on a horse he couldn't ride. He'd given it to her finally, years later, still unfinished, and she'd never had the heart to have him finish it, because the being unfinished was the truest thing about it. She carried the box out to the porch to the 2 chairs that faced the mountains. Jacob was already there. He was mostly always there in the evenings, now that the work was the children's and the grandchildren's, and the ranch ran itself around them, like a river around 2 old stones. "Look what I found," Emily said, and sat down in her chair, the one that faced the mountains, and put the box on her lap. Jacob looked at it a long time. "I wondered where that got to." "You wondered. You knew exactly where it was." "I knew exactly where it was," he admitted. She opened it and took out the top letter, and it was the very first one, her own hand, 26 years old, and frightened. "I am afraid that I am going to live my entire life and never once be known by anyone," and she read it aloud, her voice gone thin and old but steady all the way to the end. When she finished, they were both quiet. "You were so scared," Jacob said. "In that first one. I could feel it through the paper. A woman scared she'd die a stranger." "I did die a stranger," Emily said. "The Emily Whitmore who wrote that letter, she died. She got on a train and she never came back. A different woman got off it." She folded the letter along its worn creases. "You did that. You and this ranch and Ruth and even my father, God rest him at the end. You killed the woman who was afraid of dying unknown, and you did it by knowing me. All the way, the whole sentence." Jacob reached over in the fading light and found her hand. The way he'd found it that first night in the dark, the way he'd found it 1,000 nights since. "I thought I fell in love with your words," he said. Emily rested her head against his shoulder the way she had 10,000 evenings, the way she would for however many were left. "You did," she said. "But the moment you got off that train, I know. The moment you let go of that doorframe and ran to me in your stockings with your shoes thrown off. I know, Jacob. You became my home." His voice was rough with all the years in it. "The words got you on the train, but you don't build a life out of words, Emily. You build it out of the day the words become a person you can hold. Everything true I ever learned, I learned in the space of an embrace on a train platform. All the letters were just directions to that one spot." Emily lifted her head and looked at him. Old now, both of them, the gray-eyed man who'd dropped his hat in the dust, the woman who'd crossed a continent on hidden pennies, and she took the letter in her hand and placed it back in the box on top of all the others and closed the lid. "Put them away," she said. "Not because they're finished, because they did their work." She handed him the box. "They brought 2 strangers close enough to touch. That's all a word can do. The touching we did ourselves." And Jacob Hayes took the wooden box that held every true thing they'd ever sent across the distance between them, and he set it down beside the chair that faced the mountains, and he did not open it again, not because their love belonged in the past, but because they no longer needed the letters to reach each other, having long since closed the last inch of distance that words were ever meant to cross. He'd fallen for her words, but it was the embrace that made her his, and made him hers, and made this porch, these mountains, this whole hard-won life, the only home either of them would ever need. And no distance, no father, no fortune, and no fear had ever been strong enough to stand against the simple final truth of 2 people who chose each other out loud to each other's faces, with nothing held back and nothing left in the mud every single day until the very end.